I'm joined by author Gary Hill. Gary, thanks for being with me.
Yep.
Gary's the author of The Other Oswald and The Wizard of Oswald, both from Trine Day. But Gary's long been a researcher. About how long have you been looking into this case?
Oh, 50 years. But the first few years, there was not much that you could find, you know. So it was just here and there. All the files were hidden. I went to Dallas, talked to a couple people, read some books, and tried to figure out what the heck happened because I was in high school when that happened, and I thought it was strange that a liberal kills a liberal. I mean, it didn't lay good. And then when Ruby shot Oswald, I knew something was up. And of course, we had hopes with the Warren Commission, which turned out to be a cover-up. And then again with Garrison, and you finally start to see that this is not going to go away. This cover-up is not going to go away. The media is controlled by the people that are involved. And so all I want to know before I die is what happened. Before I wanted to solve the case and catch the people, but now I just want to know.
Gary, when you started to wade through all of the material that was out there, like you said, not a whole ton at the beginning, but did it surprise you though, as you got a little more familiar with it, how much maybe misinformation or disinformation was being put out there?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm sure that like the CIA is putting out this disinformation, and then they went through a period where they went after posthumously killed Kennedy again. I mean, they tried to ruin his image as a see. They created a martyr, and that so in the 70s they started. Oh, he had affairs. He did this. He did that. He was no good because they didn't want to create a martyr.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I've noticed is in speaking of this misinformation, the fiction that's put out there disguised as fact. Now,
Hmm.
now, now we've seen like Libra, for example, DeLillo, there are novels out there. Stephen King did his own version, right?
Yeah,
11/22/63. So there is, if you went into the fiction section of the library, you would see those books, but there is that dangerous area of, and we don't have to get into specifics, but your take on it is this idea of what's clearly, if you look deep enough, fiction disguised as fact. And that can be very dangerous.
yeah, yeah. I agree. And Stephen King's book was a tremendous book. It was great, but it was full of disin either disinformation or uh, non-factual things. In fact, he had Oswald staying in Dallas when Oswald went to Mexico City and all that, and he never did in the video, but he just jumped to a conclusion at the beginning, and that's the problem. They have to defend that um, viewpoint because they don't want to accept the truth.
Yeah.
So it's easier to just go with the flow.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe in the 80s into Oliver Stone's release of JFK, was there a shift maybe after the HSCA came out? Maybe there's a probable conspiracy that maybe there was a shift in the public saying, okay, maybe the Warren Commission isn't accurate, that there indeed was a conspiracy. And was that the kind of pervading thought for a while? And did we go, have we gone back then to accepting the Warren Commission? I know we're speaking broadly here, but what are you seeing?
Uh, well, I think the assassinations investigation in the 70s got a lot of people thinking, and there were a lot of uh, people they were going to interview that were killed. You know, I mean, Roselli and Jane
Yeah.
Conn and
Warren Shield.
Lawrence Shield.
Yeah.
I mean, the list is long, and that can't be all coincidence. Every time there's an investigation, a whole bunch of people die. So, but Oliver Stone's movie was a landmark because another generation that knew nothing about, didn't care. He got them interested, and that led to the AARB releasing documents. It was because of that film that happened. People started writing to their congressman, and so they had to release stuff. So it's a slow development. I think 80% of the people America doesn't believe Oswald did it or did it alone, one or the other. I think, but the ones that do are hard-headed. I taught a class uh, last month,
Mhm.
and there was one guy who he had all the books, Posner,
Case
Pugliese.
closed.
Yeah, and he argued with everything I said, And I finally told him, if you want to teach the class, you can teach it because I'm not here to debate you, I'm here. So he finally shut up. But I mean, and he was convinced, he says, everybody knows Oswald did it, you know, who? The investigation in the 70s, they said there was a conspiracy and it should be investigated. Nothing happened. Everything goes back to page 12. We've had people talk. Howard Hunt, if he'd talk about Watergate, front page. Instead, he talks about JFK and oh, he's nuts. He's on the back page. And that's the way they take it. If you talk about it, you're crazy.
Yeah. Does it irk you when you go down to Dallas and if you wanted to take which I have not been yet, but if you take like I understand, like a tour,
Yeah.
you can get on a bus and it basically what I'm trying to get at is that the official sort of framework is revolves around the Warren Commission conclusion.
The school book depository
Exactly. Case
is
in point.
pro Warren Commission.
So how that is a very powerful entity for people who just show up in Dallas and they want to go through Dealey Plaza and they're reading plaques or they go
Yeah.
see where Oswald shot Tippit. So you're already thinking
Yeah.
what you're supposed to be thinking from the official conclusion.
Well, that's right. And the reason is um, people aren't educated. When you look at the case the Warren Commission puts out there, it's very convincing because they've got all this evidence. But when you take the evidence and you look at it, it falls apart in your hands. It's not there. And so what they need to do is indoctrinate people. And that's what they're doing at the school book depository. People don't ask the questions, how did he do this? And they don't even consider that. They don't they don't know the facts about. I mean, there's two things that completely destroyed the Warren Commission. And one is that Oswald went to Mexico City and was impersonated. That is to me is one purpose for that to to lay the blame on him later. And then the other is, of course, the single bullet theory, which could not happen. I mean, it is impossible. And what's really comes through with the single bullet theory is that the commission had made up their minds, and then they tried to make the evidence fit their theory, and they ran into trouble when James Tague came forward and said he was hit with a bullet. Before that, Hoover said three shots, one through Kennedy, one through uh,
Connolly.
Connolly, and the headshot.
Yeah.
And now they got a fourth bullet, and Oswald he only owned four bullets. I mean, but when you look at their evidence, you come to this conclusion. There's too much evidence. Overkill. It's planted. A lot of it's planted. And the Dallas police are very suspect with me because they were very corrupt and involved with mob, with drugs and the mafia, Cervello and those guys that were working for Marcello
Yeah.
were on were friends with these guys. They eat dinner with the sheriff, and so what would it be to help Jack Ruby get into the basement? He knows all the cops. A couple guys let him in, and you got to kill him, Jack, because we can't kill him here. You
Yeah,
know,
exactly. You think I mean, it's not a coincidence that Oswald was being transferred out of the Dallas
yeah,
police to the county.
yeah.
Can't protect you anymore after this, is
Right,
kind of thing, right? It's
right,
out of our hands.
right.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting was a tidbit when Ruby was arrested. He was to go to the through the same procedure as Oswald to go to the county courts
Yeah.
building. And when he got to the garage, he ran to the car and jumped in the back seat on the floor. In other words, they're going to get me now.
Yeah. And they did eventually. They
Well,
did.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, eventually. So let's talk about some recent developments and I just want to get your take on some things. When Secret Service agent Paul Landis came out with his
yeah.
news about a year and a half ago, I think everyone who should be watching is familiar with his story. What was your reaction to this?
It explains the magic bullet. I mean, what I can't believe is he waited what 30 years, 40 years, didn't tell anybody. I mean, how could he not follow this and know about the single bullet? So what I have from all I've read and from everything I know, the first shot hit Kennedy in the back. Okay, and it only went in a short distance. And then the second shot hit Connolly, and then the third shot blew his head off. Well, one shot missed. The throat wound, I think, had to be a piece of skull fragment from the headshot because it was real small. But there could have been another shot from the front. That's true too. But so what happened, according to Landis, when they took JFK out of the car in the Parkland Hospital, he found bullets. And he found that bullet pristine, stuck in the seat. And it would be right where Kennedy fell back with Jackie when she pulled him over. Then he goes and lays it on a stretcher and doesn't tell anybody. He doesn't turn it over to anybody. I mean, what sense does that make? I mean, it makes no sense. And that would explain the bullet that fell off the stretcher and it's pristine and they used it to fill the gap for the single bullet because without the single bullet, there has to be more than one shooter. And so that's the dilemma they were in, but they always made the evidence fit their point of view. If someone said it wasn't Oswald, they don't interview. They call the people that agree with them. And that's all they did. I mean, how can you not call Domingo Benavides? He's the closest witness to the Tippit
Tippit.
shooting.
Yeah.
And he saw the gun. He saw the guy. And he said it wasn't Oswald. And so they didn't call. How could you not call the witness that's the most close?
Let's talk about that since you brought it up.
Yeah.
Do you think that was part of the plot to get rid of Tippit, or did something go awry? What's your read on that,
I
Gary? What
think
happened there?
I think ultimately you have to look at it Dallas in 1963.
Okay.
Okay. There's a lot of things going on. Racist.
Yeah.
Half of the members of the police force were Ku Klux Klan or Birch
Numbers.
Society.
Yeah.
And Tippit I don't think he was political, but he was involved with the people that were in the Birch Society. So anyway, what I think, I don't know what Tippit was thinking he was doing, but at some point when they didn't get Oswald, kill him right after the assassination and he got away, and then they didn't kill him at the theater, he had to go. Somebody had to kill him. Now he's in police custody, so they can't do it. And here's their attitude. Killing Kennedy is just another shooting. It's nothing. They didn't care about Kennedy. But if the same guy kills a policeman, one of us, we're going to get him. So at some point they used Tippit to get the police involved in setting Ruby up or whatever happened. It's also strange, the Tippit shooting is really strange. I mean, it's really, you often wonder, what's he doing? Why is he going there? Who was that? What was going on? And different people see different things. They're not reliable, as witnesses. But I mean, Tippit, how is he talking to this guy through the door? And then he gets out of the car and he kills him. I don't know, you
It was
know.
a very violent shooting too.
Yeah.
It was an execution, really.
He went and executed him. He
Yeah.
went back after he shot him 3 times
Yeah.
and shot him in the head. That's execution. That's mob, baby.
Gangland. Yeah.
And then throwing the shells. There's another example of I want to get caught. If the shells stay in the gun, they can't trace them to him. But instead, he's throwing them out. Wants to get caught, dropping that wallet. I mean, what fool would drop their wallet with their ID in it in at a shooting of a policeman? I think that was planted there because if Oswald escaped, look, we know who he is, we're going to get him. Okay. But instead, they got him at the theater. So now he's got another wallet.
Yeah.
I
Because
mean,
we
if
all
you're,
carry two wallets with us, Gary.
no, he had three. He had one at home with Marina.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying about too much evidence.
Yeah.
Either he is stupid as hell. I mean, if you're going to kill the president, would you have a picture of you with a rifle and communist papers and pistol? I think he was thought, that he was going to go to Cuba and he had to show himself as a revolutionary. And they told him, well, take a picture, that'll help you get to Cuba. You show that to them. And so he did.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it was used against him later.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So how do you feel then about where we are with with what the Trump administration has done? I mean, what's your take on where we are with the
I
80,000?
don't know what to think about Trump doing this
Yeah.
because it's not the things he does, unless he has a vendetta against CIA or something. I don't know. But I mean, it's really interesting that they got that panel together uh, and got some people from conspiracy people there to ask what documents they wanted and so forth. And I saw a video of one of the Republican uh, congressmen or whatever walking out of one of those meetings and they're interviewing him. And he said, there's no doubt there was more than one shooter. The shots came from the front. I'm convinced, blah, blah, blah. So that you hope, but I've had my hopes up so many times, during the Garrison investigation and in the 70s. And it always gets shrugged off. The media won't help. The media doesn't cover it. They'll put it on page 9 or something, or they won't, and then they'll have a show on, and it'll just have people like Posner and not anybody from the other side, saying uh, their version of it. But the thing is, people like Alan Dulles said, people don't read, but he was wrong because all our researchers did read.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going to happen. I can't get my hopes up again, but I think it's pretty clear that it wasn't Oswald. And even if it was, there had to be more people. So
I think it bears mention one of the biggest suspects in your most recent book, Wizard of Oswald, is Angleton.
yeah,
Do you still think that way? And uh,
yeah.
obviously,
And that's being proved by what's coming out now. They found that, I mean, originally the CIA denied it, they knew him or anything about him. And now we find out that Angleton had 190 pages in a file on Oswald on his desk, in 59. So, and he's the most secretive guy in the whole CIA. He ran his own show and they were afraid of him. I mean, he actually could do anything and he didn't tell anybody. So when Oswald went to Russia, he was using him in the mole hunt, and all of the information coming back was only to go to Angleton and his small group, CI SIG. It didn't go to the other parts of the CIA because they thought the mole was in somewhere in the other part of the CIA. So he had to keep it hush hush. But they didn't open a 201 on him till 60, a whole year almost. But there's no doubt that he was behind Oswald.
Yeah,
And he's involved in a whole lot of other things that we didn't know about. He's involved with mob because he had this lawyer, Mario Brode, who worked for him and worked for Hoffa and all his people. And he worked with the Mossad in Israel.
yeah.
And
And
then it comes out in this. They had this program. It's in my second book, Redskins, where they would interview people tourists who could travel or were sent there on business or good subjects for, surveillance or for passing information. And the one, the guy that he got to read all of the Oswald's mail, the HD Lingual program, he came from that program. He was Jew. He was in the Mossad. It sent him there,
that's right.
and he got him back. And from then on, he was their HT lingual guy. He read all of Oswald's files. But that's how they got him through that Redskin program.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's important to note, I mean,
yeah,
Angleton was really the one guy for the conduit with Israel, really.
yeah. Oh, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, that was his station, you know.
absolutely. Some
Um,
people thought he was an Israeli mole in the CIA. Yeah, but it's clear now that what's being found, there's no smoking guns, because if there were, they'd have destroyed them. But there is enough proof to back up the things that researchers have found, so far.
do you hold any credence, or what do you think of the idea of JFK trying to halt Israel's pursuit of nuclear weapons?
Yeah, I think he was. That's another thing, reason I think they killed him. And Johnson and Angleton wanted them to have the missiles, and he didn't want it because it would upset the balance in the Middle East. So that was another reason. He wouldn't go. I mean, he had so many strikes against him. The first one was the Bay of Pigs, then the missile crisis, and then he's making peace with the Russians and going over their head behind doors to deal with Khrushchev directly. You don't go over their head. You got to go through channels, what bureaucracy is like. Uh, and then he was going to make peace with Castro. That killed the Cubans. I mean, no way. So they thought they were doing, it was a security state that thought that he was not, uh, and he was a threat. And so they planned it. They took him out. And he had to die because he was going to get reelected. Then Bobby be in for 8 years and Teddy be free.
1985, if you want to go from 60 to 85.
And a lot of them thought that he was double crossing them and kissing up to the communists. And they thought that you have to understand the paranoia about communism. If I lived in the 50s, if you wore a pink shirt, you might get arrested. Or if your neighbor said he's a commie, you'd get arrested. And it came out of World War II. Uh, they they knew after Germany and Japan were defeated, they knew the next war was going to be with Russia. Okay. I mean, they knew it. And so Dulles planted this stay behind army called Gladio in Europe in case the Russians tried to, they were like mercenaries underground. So, and then that escalated into when Italy almost became communist after that. So they sent people down there. And pretty soon, instead of just spying on them, they were fixing elections, terrorist things, blowing up things. It became a terrorist organization. And that carried over, and then it went into Spain. You know, and then they started using drugs to pay for it. And that had been building and building and building. And if you even said the word communist, people would, and even not a lot of them didn't know what it means, but they programmed people through the media. You hear this word. I mean, that's basically what it was. And if they heard the word, well, that's all you have to say. That's why Hoover thought Martin Luther King, the whole movement was Russians were behind it. The commies were behind it, or the American communists. But, you know, it was terrible. It was a terrible time. And so the hate and and the Bay of Pigs, they planned that on purpose, and they knew it was going to fail. They thought they could set him up to send in American troops, and he didn't. And that was not good. But the missile crisis was the big thing. What happened with the military in particular? We don't talk too much about the military having involvement, but they had to. And Curtis LeMay hated hated JFK. Here's the thing. When you see what they're thinking behind scenes, we had Khrushchev was always touting that they had more missiles than we did, blah blah. So that we had the U-2 fly over and found out that we had superiority. And so the thinking like behind LeMay and them, we have to strike now because in a couple years they'll catch us, the missiles, and then it won't be easy. So he presumed a first strike, like Pearl Harbor,
Yeah. Yeah.
not only against Russia, but China. Every communist country, anybody that had communists, they were going to launch nuclear missiles. And that would have been the end of the world. I mean, there's no doubt. And Kennedy didn't let them do it, and that was strike three. I mean, that was, you know, but if he hadn't been president, and I can't think of anybody else that would not have listened to all their advisors and either invaded Cuba or did strikes against the missiles. All his, except maybe McNamara and Bobby, everybody was telling him, you got to invade them. You got to get rid of those missiles. We have to, they wanted to get Cuba and get Castro out. But he didn't, and I really don't think we'd be alive if Nixon had been president or Johnson or any of those people.
Yeah. Wow. How much do you think the assassination of the president was an attack on Bobby?
Well, from the mob's viewpoint, yeah.
Yeah.
As Marcello said, if you cut off the tail, the dog still bites you. If you kill Bobby,
Right.
JFK comes after you. If you kill the dog, dog's tail, no, So
Yeah.
they at first there were plots against Bobby. Hoffa was going to blow up his house or something, or his car, and then they changed their mind uh, because JFK would come after them, I guess. From their viewpoint, yeah, and nobody. I mean, Bobby made enemies. He had more enemies, you know, than anybody. I mean, the mob hated him, the military hated him, you know, the CIA hated him. Uh, and so I think he knew when his brother was killed that it was his fault, partially anyway, that he knew that the things he had done with the mob, the things he did with Mongoose and maybe plots against Castro backfired. So he was like incapacitated for a year or more.
Yeah.
but he could have gone after them, but his thinking was, I have to become president to go after that, and so he says the Warren Commission's right, but behind the scenes, the Kennedy family didn't believe that. In fact, they had I had a guy that went to Soviet Union that back and forth, and they had him tell, I don't know if it was Khrushchev or Mikoyan or somebody, that they thought it was a right-wing conspiracy in the United States. So unfortunately, he shot himself in the foot again because he kept saying the Warren Commission was right. Meanwhile, he had his own investigation going on, and he found out it wasn't. It wasn't. And the first thing he did was ask McComb, "Is it your guys?"
You guys have something to do with this,
And
yeah.
the Cuban guy too. But and then the worst thing that he did, I think, he really uh, scuttled the Garrison investigation. He
Hmm.
sent he sent his right hand man, I forget his name, there, and they went after Garrison, and discredited him and all this stuff. And I don't know why he would do that. I don't know. He was a complicated guy.
But you voted in 68, didn't you, Gary?
I I
Primary?
I voted in the primary, and
Yeah.
I voted for Bobby Kennedy. And you know what? I voted in every election since, and that's the only time I voted for somebody I wanted that I thought was the best choice. The other ones were all the worst of two. This one's bad, but this one's worse, so I vote for him.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was. There was nobody to vote for. That's sad because our country deserves better. Look at the leadership we have now compared to, you know, when Kennedy was president. But
Yeah, there seems to be a co-opting after the Kennedys were taken
yeah,
out, a kind of co-opting, maybe the executive branch is owned by something beyond the executive branch. And even though there's been hopes and glimmers of potential leaders, it all seems to be following that same template of kind of a post-Kennedy landscape. I don't know if it's an intelligence brand, they're the ones in control. Do you see what I'm talking about?
yeah. That's what happened. That it- when they killed him, they took over the government. And the CIA was running amok, and he was going to destroy the CIA. Some documents came out recently at this new investigation that showed that he sent a memo to Schlesinger and told him that they were going to dismantle the CIA. And I'm sure the CIA found that out. So he had to go. And if you look at who's gaining from the assassination, whose backs to the wall. Okay, CIA's backs to the wall because if he gets in again, he's going to break them into 1,000 pieces. Johnson is going to go to prison because not only was Kennedy going to drop him in 64, he was involved in the two scandals, Bobby
Bobby
Baker and
Baker.
Billy Saul Estes.
That's right.
And Bobby Kennedy was leaking info about Johnson to the Senate or whatever. And the investigator had to be Hoover. So the FBI is investigating Johnson. Okay. Hoover and him are like this. And Hoover's going to be mandatorily retired in 64 or 5. So here's three people. Johnson's not even going to lose the presidency. It's his last chance. He's going to go to jail. He was corrupt as hell. And then, so this is what you have. You have Hoover gone, you have Johnson gone, you have the CIA gone. You have to kill him. You have to.
You're in Pennsylvania, is that right?
Yes. Yes.
What was your reaction last summer on the attempt on the president's life, on the candidate Trump's life, in your state?
It was staged, no doubt about it.
Really?
I think that. I think it was staged. First of all, he ducks down behind
The podium?
and then he comes up and he has some blood trickling down from his ear. and he used that. He raised his fist and he used that as, yeah, yeah, see, probably, I don't know. I wouldn't know how the guy got killed. There was a picture of Trump and this kid together somewhere, somebody had on the internet at one time.
Hmm.
So I don't know how it worked, but I definitely think it was uh, just like the Walker shooting, publicity, gain, uh, you know, people feel sorry for you and want to vote for you because you're tough and you're standing there taking bullets and, all this stuff.
Let's bring that in there real quick. So when General Walker was shot at in April of 63 by Oswald, is that what you think?
No, and very few people really did. When it was investigated, the, Oswald was never a suspected of anything. They thought there was this guy named James Dull, I think, that uh, worked for Walker,
Walker.
and they had a fight over something, money, and he left, and they thought that was who was did it. And before the shooting, his his one of his assistants saw two men in the alley a couple days before, staking the place out. Then a little kid, a 15-year-old kid next door, after the shooting, saw two men get into two cars.
Yeah.
And Oswald doesn't drive.
Right.
And how ridiculous is it to take your gun, a rifle on a bus? I mean, this guy, he travels everywhere by bus or taxi, to kill people and come back and escape. I mean, it's all ridiculous. But no, and then what really most of the researchers I think that Walker staged that whole thing because he had come to that midnight ride for communism. And he was the guy on the white horse. See, the commies are trying to kill me because they're afraid. So they think he set it up. Never was mentioned Oswald until Marina.
Right.
After the assassination, it's the first time and the bullet was a 30-06, so it wasn't his. So I mean, that all is another strange case. Then you got the right wingers doing antics. You know that Posty played bridge there at Walker's house. His partner was
Surrey,
yeah,
Robert Surrey, right?
Robert
That was
Zurich.
his
Yeah. They
Walker's aide de camp.
yeah. And I think Ruby was seen around that area. So God only knows. There are so many suspects and so much evidence. But I can't see that and the note that she found never mentions Walker. Or the threatening note that he left a note saying if he's arrested, do this.
Oswald left,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Yeah,
Left Marina a
right.
note saying, get rid of my clothes. The jail's down here. But it doesn't say anything about Walker. So it could have been something else. I mean, I don't know. But
Yeah.
we had a trial, would have been amazing. But he never had one. And I knew he wasn't going to get one. Somebody was going to get him.
Gary, do you Ruth Payne is still with us.
Oh, yeah.
Do you see any kind of Deus Ex Machina 11th hour thing coming from her? She pretty much she's
She's
done
my
with it.
favorite actress. No, she is, and she's amazing, because she really comes across as, this Quaker. Here, these her and her husband are Quakers, and yet he works for Bell Helicopter during the Vietnam War. His helicopters are killing tons of people. His boss is Walter Dornberger, who was, found guilty at Nuremberg. How do they rectify that with, supposedly they're peace-loving uh, Quakers? I think it's a front, and you would know about the Quakers
Yeah,
and
right.
and those religious orders. I always suspected something. Why are these churches always involved? Why is all of Bannister's guys involved with these churches and stuff, you know? But I didn't think much of it till Evica came out and wrote a book about it. And then
Right. Right.
light bulb went off
A
in my
certain
head.
arrogance, George Michael
Nothing,
Ivica.
nothing's a coincidence. I mean, well, there's smoke, there's fire. And that's what I think about the religious stuff.
Yeah.
But then most of the religions were right wing, they're anti-communist. You know, my mother was Catholic, and she, oh, communism, communism, everybody's a communist. And I said, what is it? She didn't know what it was, but
Didn't matter.
it didn't matter. And so she was sucked in to this because she wasn't educated. And she didn't read, you know, and it's very easy. And the church was part of it. It was sucking her in because they had a thing called the Blue Army. Do you
That's right.
remember that?
Sure. Fatima.
And she was donating money every week to the Blue Army because they're going to convert Russia. What it actually was propaganda and they were using that money for kind of warfare against Russia with uh, and dropping the leaflets. Remember Radio Free Europe?
Sure.
That was all propaganda. That was all, and but you couldn't explain that to her. She wouldn't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
her, your mother's Catholicism, which was a lot different prior to the 60s, because Vatican II changed everything kind of. Even if you're not Catholic, I'm sure you've heard of Vatican II and how what was Latin was now English, and it was kind of
yeah,
a different Catholic church. That
yeah,
church, the church of your mother, would have been David Ferry, how he would have seen the Catholic
yeah,
Church. He would
yeah,
have grown up in that kind of black and white Catholicism.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, you're right. But I think he liked the pomp and circumstance, the
right.
ritual of wearing the robe or whatever, and um,
The symbols, and there's symbols in Dealey
and
Plaza.
taking action against communism by flying over Cuba and doing it. And that would be like the Crusaders,
Yeah, yeah.
the Catholic Crusade. And that's how he saw himself as a crusader.
Yeah. Well, you do a great job in The Wizard of Oswald, the new book, about getting into this idea of knighthood, of modern
Oh
knighthood.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you do a great job of not losing focus because you can, as you know, you can just get into all different places.
It's
So you're
always
able to streamline that, Gary, very well.
thank you. I think that's probably my last book on JFK, unless something really comes out. I mean, I think I put everything in there that I've learned from research and interviews with people and so forth.
So are you hopeful, Gary? Are you frustrated? Tell me where you are right now.
I never get my hopes up anymore, but I know enough about it. I want just some few things have to be cleared up so I can die. You know, uh, I'm 78, so I won't be around that long. But I wanted just before I died, I wanted to know what happened. What was going on? How did it work? You know, and we kind of know, but we don't know specifics. Uh, but there's always hope that maybe, uh, they'll find out. But I think it's too late because everybody's dead. See, why they put those documents away for 75 years or whatever is they knew that by then everyone would be dead and that was guilty, and they knew that the next generation wouldn't care. They wouldn't know anything about it. They wouldn't be interested in it. And that's where Oliver Stone's
Yeah.
movie changed it for one generation anyway.
Real quick, you were professionally, you were an educator. You still
Yeah,
are. I mean,
I was a teacher. Yeah, I've been retired 23 years,
yeah.
but I still do talks and uh, some classes at the junior college up here and stuff. But No, I taught 33 years.
Yeah. Well, one last thing, Gary, and this may seem totally out of left field, but do you remember the Frank Sinatra Jr. kidnapping?
Yes.
This was about, what, a week, maybe at most 2 weeks after the assassination.
Yep.
Okay.
I think what that was about was the mob wanted the pressure taken off them for the JFK thing. So they created this incident that would take the media attention away. And I think maybe Sinatra knew about it, because he was in bed with the mob. And we'll just take him for a couple of weeks and give him back. I mean, that I suspect. But then, see, our problem now is that we suspect everybody and everything. That's what happens when the government lies to you all the time. Pretty soon you don't trust anybody. Take it with a grain of salt. Look at the thing that people have to do is look at both sides. But they have closed minds, a lot of them. They've been indoctrinated with this view, right wing, or whatever. And they won't even look at the other side. You can't do that because then you're only hearing one side of the story, and the truth is probably in the middle some. But
Yeah.
that's hard to change. And I really think that MK Ultra, when they were using drugs and hypnosis to try to control people, I think it evolved into using the media to control minds, like Fox News, Uh,
Well, that would be Operation Mockingbird to a degree, wouldn't
well,
it?
yeah. Well, Mockingbird too was meant to control the press for propaganda purposes, because what's his name? Mary Myers, Cord Meyer
Or
started.
Meyer Jr.
He was
Yeah.
the first one to start that, or
Right.
he came and said, no, it was Wisner, and
Yeah.
then
Frank
and
Wisner.
he took it over from Wisner.
Right.
And the first one they got was the Washington Post.
Yeah.
They got Graham to do it. And then they got people in all of these papers. There's people that are CIA people, and they're controlling what they print. That if you print a story saying Warren Commission's crap, you'd lose your job or whatever, or they tell you you got to print this, not this. And they use patriotism as a reason, so everybody's sucked in. But I think that that was before it wasn't as bad as now because Reagan did away with that free fairness doctrine. And it used to be that you had to, anything you said on it, you were liable for suit if it wasn't true. And he got rid of that. And that's when all the lying started, and it tell their own story and blatantly lie. But I think that could have evolved from the MKO. And mind control is something that they always wanted to do. And Angleton too was involved in. You find out how many things he was involved in that never knew. We never knew. He had his own assassination team. He had gone to England with Harvey to study how to do an assassination. And then he's involved with the mob, and he's involved with the Mossad, and he's running his own programs uh, behind the scenes, and nobody knows what he's doing. He doesn't answer to anybody. So,
Wow.
I think he had to be one of the key players. And he was also a key player in the cover-up because he sent his one of his guys to be the liaison. He was the liaison kind of with the Warren Commission, and Angleton was feeding them information like Dulles was. They didn't even tell him about the CIA mafia plots. I mean, if they didn't known that, if but see, no one would have believed that in 63.
Right.
Everyone thought that looked up to the government and thought they were good. If you'd have told people that the CIA was working with the mafia in 63, they laughed at you. They wouldn't, you're crazy. You're nuts. If they knew half the things they were doing, overthrowing governments, you know, uh, running drugs in the United States, murdering people. But everyone then believed in the country. And that's why they picked Warren and all those guys for the Warren Commission, because look, these are upstanding men. They would not lie. These are, you know,
Top men.
they are above reproach. I mean, they're just
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
The blue
so that,
ribbon, the blue ribbon commission. Yeah.
yeah, and that was true. I mean, I talked to a lot of people. Oh, well, Warren wouldn't, do that or whatever. And they were corrupt too, because Gerald Ford was feeding everything back to the FBI, and Dulles was making sure they didn't know this or that, and Warren was so afraid they'd find a conspiracy that he covered up a lot of stuff. But he wouldn't interview Sylvia Duran because she's a communist. I mean, what kind of excuse is that?
Priorities. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. And his interaction with Ruby is just so strange. He's completely missing what Ruby, I think, is trying to tell him in a way that would
yeah.
not
Well,
implicate him.
he didn't want to know. I mean, it was pre. Johnson told him there was going to be a nuclear war, and 40 million people in America are going to die in an hour if you don't. We have to squelch rumors because we know. Johnson said we know it's Cuban and Russian conspiracy, it's communist conspiracy. But if that happens, there'll be a nuclear war, and all these people will die. So you have to do your duty, you know, and quell all the rumors. So, I mean, that document that they did that the Bobby Kennedy's second in command, Kassenbaum,
Oh, Katzenbach, Nicholas Katzenbach.
he sends this letter to Hoover or somebody and
Oh,
says and tells them what we're going to find on the war.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need to make sure that Oswald that we
Yeah,
convince the public that Oswald is the lone assassin.
there was no conspiracy. You know, that's insane.
So,
But you see, it's so obvious that they were using Oswald to link the assassination to Cuba or Russia. And he was perfect because he was working, undercover. Uh, I mean, he's really an enigma. I have read and learned more about him, and I still don't know who he is because I have two versions. One, he's right wing, and I led three lives for the FBI.
yeah,
He's
no
undercover,
break.
and they're telling him to do this. They told him you got to order these guns and take a picture with them, and then we're going to take them to court for selling the guns to communists. And that was just and the Fair Play for Cuba committee, they were after them. I mean, Hoover thought that they were uh, Satan. I mean, they were gonna stop them. And so Oswald starts his own, everywhere there, COINTELPRO, he's there in Clinton, everywhere, every one of those, and that those programs were not just Hoover, it was Angleton and Hoover that were running the what do you call it? COINTELPRO. They
Yeah, yeah. The FBI's
counterintelligence,
right.
counter. So, everywhere you look with Angleton, he's there in the background somehow, you know, and that's suspicious. And he was mentally ill. I think he was paranoid
He was
about
an
what,
alcoholic.
and he was alcohol.
Yeah.
But see, he worked during World War II and 50s, whatever. He worked with Kim Philby, and they were close friends. And Philby turned out to be a Russian agent, and
Hmm.
And that would had to have a big effect because he trusted him and they were good friends. And he was like the best agent that the British had. And then this Popoff's mole thing comes along. And again, you know, there's a mole in the CIA, and he doesn't trust anybody now. He's after everybody. But that's paranoia. But
Yeah, destructive paranoia,
yeah,
ultimately.
yeah, yeah.
You know.
When you have power and paranoia, and he had power,
Yeah,
I mean, that's scary.
yeah, yeah.
It still amazes me why they didn't go after Cuba after Kennedy was killed. I think Vietnam began to take a preference to, they wanted to go into Vietnam and they probably couldn't do both. I don't know. It's strange because I thought that's one of the reasons you killed him so you could get rid of Castro. But then that's also what part of the false flag of the Mexico City thing was to get rid of Castro. And it's obvious that everything Oswald did was along those lines to make him look like a Castroite, to make him look like a communist. But he didn't have any communist friends. His friends are all CIA people and right wingers.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't really trust that Russian community, you know,
The white
uh,
Russian community of
Russian in
Texas,
Tolstoy's
Dallas,
foundation.
Fort Worth.
Yeah, a lot of them, I think, were working with CIA to for various reasons or purposes. And I think they took him in because,
Well,
yeah,
think about where he was when he defected. He was in Minsk,
yeah,
you know, a heavily white Russian
yeah,
community,
yeah, yeah,
Belarus, you know. Um,
yeah.
so he was being strung
And the
along.
Morin was
Right.
white Russian. Uh,
Right. Right.
you have to go back years and years and lead up to something that happened because there's cause. Every effect must have a cause. And so you don't just look at the Kennedy assassination and say this. You got to think what happened, who hated him, what did he do to get these people to kill him, kill him. And it's just obvious. And you can't believe, no one wants to believe that all these people were involved. The CIA, the mafia, the military, the Cubans. But if you look at those people that are suspect, they are all in the same group. They're severely anti-communist, and the CIA and the mafia are two sides of the same coin. They're working together. The Cubans are working with the CIA. So they're all one group, really. They're just pieces from, a couple mafia guys, couple Cuban guys. And so if you look at it that way, they're rogues or whatever. You can it makes sense. And they keep it quiet. And you have to suspect that the Cuban mafia, the plots to kill Castro were turned on Kennedy. They already had this in place, this ZR rifle, and
Right.
they were using French mercenaries a lot.
Allegedly.
Yeah, and the mercenaries were involved in the drug network with the mafia. So you see, it goes around, and then it's the same mercenaries tried to kill De Gaulle,
That's right.
a couple
Yeah.
times.
OAS. Yeah.
And they hated Kennedy because he was in favor of Algeria's
Algeria.
independence. And,
Yeah.
and so see how complicated. I mean, that's why there was this book by a science fiction writer, real famous science fiction.
Clark.
No, not Clark. Oh my God. When you get to my age, things got to win. Anyway, it
Whoops.
was a really neat book. It was about time travel. And they had this company, they had this was way in the future. They had this company that could do time travel, and they would meet and discuss how to, like, for instance, if they send you back in time to 1940, 1938 or 9, and you move something on the shelf and Hitler doesn't come to power. I mean, it's like this led to this happened to this. It changes everything.
Yeah.
Changes one little change sends the whoa, I was losing you. One little change escalates to the other little changes
Yeah.
and so forth.
In other words, it's not so much maybe John himself. I mean, there were actions as President Kennedy that he did that didn't win favor, but he was also the son of Joe, and he was,
Oh yeah.
part of this Irish Catholic background, a different kind of America than what maybe a Dulles is used to.
And see, that's just what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Now here we go. Bobby's to blame. Joe's to blame for both. You know, he had him appoint Bobby as Attorney General, which was the worst thing he could do, you know. And then he goes after the mob after Joe tells him, you know, we're going to help you out. I mean, that's exactly it, you know.
Yeah.
Joe Kennedy was, you go back to him, and that's a lot of it.
Yeah.
But he was right wing too, you know, that
Yeah.
during the war.
Oh yeah, ambassador to England. He was.
Yeah, he didn't want anybody to get in the war. He agreed with the Nazis, like Lindbergh. That's my next book, Lindbergh.
Is that right?
It's still a couple years away.
Why specifically Lindbergh?
I don't think there was a kidnapping.
Speaking of kidnappings.
Mhm. You have to get inside Lindbergh. He was a fascist, for one thing, and he was what do you call it? Genes uh, genetics. There,
Eugenist.
eugenicist. Yeah, and didn't want. He wanted to have 12 perfect kids, and this baby had some problems. It was had rickets. Its toes overlapped, and
Yeah.
its head was too big. It wasn't perfect. Okay, so I think that either the baby accidentally died, fell, something, and they didn't want the publicity of that, so they staged a kidnapping. Because guess this, listen to this. A couple of weeks before the kidnapping, Lindbergh says, "Where's the baby?" It's not in his crib. And they go all run around the house looking for the baby, like it was kidnapped. And then finally, Lindbergh picks him out of the closet and laughs. He had this sense of humor. He put snakes in people's bed that were afraid of snakes. He had this one guy drink kerosene or something. He almost died. That's the things that he thought were funny.
So he planted the baby in the closet.
He hid it in the closet and told them it was missing. That's sick. And they were terrified. His mother was terrified.
Oh, yeah.
So what if the baby accidentally died, and he got them all to agree, we'll stage a kid because you know we can't let him know that he died here. Or maybe one of the uh, Lindbergh's or his wife's sister uh, and the brother. There's all kind of stories about uh, that Morrow, her father, had an illegitimate son, and he was trying to get 50,000 from the Morrow family. And then the fact that Elizabeth was threatened with kidnapping when she was young in college, and they wanted 50,000. And they put it in this place, and the guy never showed up to get it. But then there's also the chance that he took the baby himself, and the family didn't know it because he was working with this guy named Carell, Dr. Carell, who was a eugenicist, and he was experimenting on animals and people. He may have taken him to him. They worked together. I mean, it's really a weird case because it's worse than the Kennedy assassination. There's so many things going on with it. Different people, you know, why is it? And then the worst thing he did, they had the signature on the paper on the kidnap papers. These are
Ransom.
they have a symbol, and they said you'll know it's a real kidnappers from the symbol. They had a symbol on the bottom of the ransom note. Now you know only the kidnappers and Lindbergh and the police would know that. Lindbergh gave it to the mob, the mafia. He gave it to this guy named Rosner, and so now how many people have that and can pretend that they're the, you know, that was he did a lot of things, and then he took over the investigation. As soon as the state police got there, he was God to them. So he told them what not to look at, what to look at, and he made so many mistakes. And you have to think, wonder if it's on purpose, you know. But it's a very strange case, you know.
So this necessarily wouldn't be the spirit of St. Louis then.
Huh?
This wouldn't be the spirit of St. Louis then, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean the fact that he had sympathies and even more than sympathies to the
And
to
then
fascists.
did you know that he had children to three women in Germany?
No.
He had like I think five or six kids to these three. Two of them were sisters.
Wow.
They were eugenicists, and they wanted to have his children. So he's living part-time in Germany, part-time in England after they left the United States, and he's procreating. And he did have like a dozen kids in it, all told, you know. So
Well, that sounds like that would be a Trine Day book right up their alley. So I
yeah.
hope you keep up with it.
You can draw uh, a lot of closeness to the JFK thing because those were the two crimes of the century. First, it was the Lindbergh, that was a crime of the century. Then JFK was a crime of the century. And there's a lot of things in common, you know, and but it's going to take years
Keep it up, Gary. Keep
put
it
it
up.
all together and find out what angle I want to go through, you know,
Oh, yeah,
to
it's
tie them to.
fascinating.
And I think I'm going to call it the other Patsy. I have a picture of Oswald and Hoffman on the cover.
And and the gentleman next to Oswald is who is that then? You're saying? Okay.
Was electrocuted for the Lindbergh kidnapping.
Okay. That's him. Okay.
He didn't do it. It was ridiculous. And it was a lot of stuff the same. First of all, when Kennedy was killed, it was a plot. And there were these Russians and Cubans and whatever. Russians and yeah. And then once they had Oswald, it's a lone nut. Same thing happened in the Lindbergh case. They thought the mob, some mafioso took the baby for kidnapping. And then when they got uh, Altman, suddenly he's alone, not, you know, and they had no evidence. Again, they planted evidence just like JFK. So there's a lot of relationship that could be interesting to write about. No.
Great. Well, Gary, thanks a lot for your time
Yeah.
and for keep up with what you're doing.
Thank you, James. And I really enjoy your books too. The
Thanks, Gary.
You're the first one other than Ebica that's written about this, and it needs to be. It needs to be brought out in the open, you know.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary.
Appreciate it.